Traditionally, when we speak about achieving manhood, we look at it through the lens of skills as a warrior, or fertility, or the ability to provide for your family, just to name a few. However, the manhood that I'm talking about today is that point in your life where you're at peak machismo, peak swagger, and have incredible skill with a sawed-off shotgun. That point in your life where you fought the undead and survived, only bearing a few scars, a missing forearm, and can still crack jokes about the whole experience. I'm talking about the type of manhood that means your skill with weapons is only outmatched by your skill with one-liners and charming the ladies. This is the story of the gold standard for manliness, Ash Williams, as told in The Evil Dead 2 and The Army of Darkness. Just a quick review for those of you who are interested in my opinion on the matter. Evil Dead 1 and 2 are essentially the same movie, with 2 being a low-budget horror classic and 1 being an even lower-budget movie bordering on an experimental student film. Both are good. Evil Dead 2, in my opinion, is a better film than both Evil Dead 1 and The Army of Darkness. Not to say that Evil Dead 1 or The Army of Darkness are bad movies. It's just that Army of Darkness in particular feels a bit more Hollywood, which loses some of the charm. All 3 movies are eminently rewatchable. If for some reason you have not seen all 3, check them out. Also, I've heard that people really enjoyed the new TV series, but I haven't bothered to watch them or the movie remakes because I'm a terrible YouTuber. But the focus of today is the main character in all 3 movies. The legend, Ash Williams, played by the legend, Bruce Campbell. The year is 1982 AD, Michigan. The legend begins with Ash, his girlfriend Linda, and her sister Cheryl, and their friends Scott and Shelley venturing out into the deep woods of Michigan for a bit of fun. The cabin was rented by Scotty and Shelley, who were allegedly familiar with the heavily wooded area. Once they get settled inside the cabin, they find the book, the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, aka the Book of the Dead, along with a tape recorder. On the tape was a recording of the previous resident in that cabin, Professor Raymond Noby, who was translating passages from the Book of the Dead. By playing the tape, the cursed passage was read aloud, which summoned a Kandarian demon. Because of this demon, Ash's friends were consequently possessed and then killed off one by one. But eventually the demon made a fatal mistake. It went after Ash. Little did it know, but Ash Williams would prove to be more than even a demon from the underworld could handle. First, the demon tried to physically attack Ash, but being the Chad that he is, Ash survived. Next, the demon tried to possess him, and for a time, it changed Ash into one of the Deadites. Once the sun rose, Ash was able to fight back against the possession and return to normal. Mostly. With the demon close behind him, Ash ran back into the cabin and managed to hide in the fruit cellar underneath the trap door, waiting for the evil force to leave. Ash, always being cool and collected, was able to keep the demon at bay. Next, the demon reanimated the headless corpse of his girlfriend, who bit Ash on his hand. Normally a superficial injury, this would become a much bigger problem in the near future. Realizing what he was up against, Ash put aside his grief and his fear and took his first step to being the man we know today. Eventually, the bite on his hand became a possession, and Ash lost control of it. For Ash, there was only one reasonable solution. Cut the whole damn thing off. I've always found it funny that Ash seems much more upset about losing his hand versus losing his girlfriend. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere, but perhaps he knew and was confident that he would always find another girlfriend. And maybe he had a special bond with his hand. I just couldn't let it go. After all that happened, Ash was able to keep his cool and even have a nice laugh with his new friends. There was a noise at the door, and at the door was Professor Nobi's daughter, her closeted lover, and 2 hillbilly guides. Not knowing what's going on, the visitors get the jump on Ash and trap him in the cellar, thinking Ash was responsible for the death and destruction around the cabin. After doing a bit of investigating, Annie, Professor Nobi's daughter, discovers that her mother, or at least what's left of her, was also trapped in the cellar. Up from the ground came the possessed corpse of Henrietta, Annie's mother. Possessing superior demonic strength, she nearly kills Ash and escapes the cellar. As a little side note, the demonic version of Henrietta is played by Ted Raimi, director Sam Raimi's brother. Apparently the costume he had to wear was so poorly constructed that he nearly suffered a heat stroke, and in some scenes, sweat can be seen pouring out of the suit. But anyway, back to the movie. Ash, now a southpaw, grabs an axe and single-handedly kills one of the possessed corpses and returns Henrietta back to the cellar. Professor Nobi, famous for being dead, suddenly appears as a force ghost and explains how, by reading the passages of the Necronomicon, they can send the Kandarian demon back to its own time. Jake, or Hillbilly number 1 as I like to call him, distraught from losing his lover/cousin, turns on Ash and throws the pages of the Necronomicon into the cellar with deadite Henrietta. Suddenly being stabbed by Annie, Jake is incapacitated and is eventually taken down into the cellar by Henrietta. What happened to the other people? It's not important. Now only Ash and Annie remain. Half the book was above ground, but the critical missing pages were down in the cellar with Henrietta, who only grew more powerful after consuming Jake. Ash makes the decision to improve his killing power by creating a prosthetic hand for his right arm. However, instead of making another hand, he attaches a chainsaw. He saws down the barrel of his shotgun, improving its short-range stopping power. Ash is now at his deadliest and ready to fight the demons head on. It is at this moment that Ash has graduated from mere mortal to legend. Ash bravely goes downstairs into the cellar and gets the missing pages of the Necronomicon, unfortunately allowing Henrietta to escape. Ash, full of swagger and already having eliminated several demons, fights Henrietta and sends her back to hell. Annie starts reading the cursed passages but is attacked by Ash's former hand before she can complete the reading. Ash has a final showdown with the demon and seemingly defeats it. But with her dying breath, Annie finished the spell to open the time portal. Yes, there's a time portal. And the Kandarian demon was pulled into the vortex. But unfortunately, Ash and his Oldsmobile were also pulled inside, sent through space and time to the place from which the demon came, England. 1300 AD. The medieval era of human history is awash in blood and conflict. The story that is about to unfold in this chapter was especially bloody, though most of this story has been lost to the sands of time. The lands from east to west were ruled by Lord Arthur, a ruler with the reputation for being ruthless but fair. The region flourished under Lord Arthur, but there was a looming threat from the north. That kingdom was led by Henry the Red, the Duke of Shale, the Lord of the Northlands, and the leader of his peoples. The region is in turmoil, with the violence from the conflict between Arthur and Henry spilling over into day-to-day life. Lord Arthur, still relatively young and a classically trained swordsman, led his own patrols through the land surrounding Castle Candar, his seat of power. These patrols serve two purposes: to hunt down any incursions from Henry the Red's northern army, and to show his own people the might and confidence of their own ruler. On one of these patrols, Lord Arthur's men discovered a group of Henry the Red's men also patrolling through what was disputed territory. A short battle ensued, and several northern prisoners were captured. Amongst those captured was none other than Henry the Red himself. A great victory for Lord Arthur and a crushing blow for Henry the Red. What this meant to both sides was potentially a huge shift in the stalemate between the two kingdoms and the end of the war, with Lord Arthur being the victor over the north. On their way back to Castle Kandar, there was a cataclysmic explosion above and a searing flash of light. Both the men and their horses dispersed from the shock, all drawing their attention to the skies above to see what caused such a terrible event. In the skies, their eyes strained and focused on two falling objects. The first heavenly object was a 1978 Oldsmobile Delta 88, a mystical creation to be sure. The second falling object seemed to be a man that would change the history of the region and save humanity from the forces of evil. That man was Ash Williams. Lord Arthur's wise man, Elaine's boss from Seinfeld, Mr. Pitt, was able to figure out from Ash's clothes and the way he arrived that he is a man that the prophecy foretold. A prophecy that said a man would fall from the heavens to defeat the undead. Ash, being a man's man, and being oblivious to his surroundings, starts mouthing off to Lord Arthur. Displeased by Ash's attitude and looking for another victory over his rival, Lord Arthur accuses Ash of being one of Henry the Red's men. Ash, along with the other prisoners, are dragged back to Castle Kandar, where they will be thrown into a pit. In this pit was a captured demon who would mutilate and consume any man that was thrown into the pit. Well, almost any man. Ash, without his weapons, was thrown into the pit. Having experienced fighting and defeating the undead, Ash does not go down without a fight. Using his skills as a warrior, Ash is able to hold the demon off until Mr. Pitt throws Ash's chainsaw down to him. Now armed, no pun intended, Ash is able to escape. The first and only time anyone has avoided being killed by that demon. At this point, the good people of Castle Kandar are astonished to see this mere mortal emerge victorious from the pit. After the way he's been treated, understandably, Ash is not in a very good mood.
See this? This is my Boomstick!
He releases Henry the Red and his men, which will prove helpful later. He drops some truth bombs on the crowd and clarifies who they're really dealing with. 5 minutes later, Ash has already formed himself a harem and starts negotiating with Mr. Pitt about how he can be sent back home to his own time. Ash's negotiations are interrupted by a deadite who would have easily killed all the people in the room. What the demon did not count on was that one man was ready for her. Ash, being from hundreds of years in the future and possessing knowledge from his job at S-Mart, constructs himself a new prosthetic hand and prepares for his hunt for the Necronomicon. Being the ladies' man, Ash is able to smooth talk his way with Sheila, who has made him a very nice horse blanket. Ash and Sheila make sweet love down by the fire, and the next morning, Ash sets off on his journey. Before Ash leaves, Mr. Pitt reminds him once more about the 3 cursed words he would have to recite to get the Necronomicon without summoning the entire army of the dead. But we all know that details are for beta losers, so Ash blows him off. Once on his journey, Ash is pursued by a demon who chases him into a windmill and takes the form of a bunch of tiny Ashes. In arguably the worst parts of the Evil Dead trilogy, Ash fights the tiny versions of himself in a slapstick Looney Tunes fashion that only the French could appreciate. So we're going to move on. As a result of his run-in with the tiny Ashes, he's split into 2 full-size beings, Good Ash and Evil Ash. Evil Ash is an exact copy of Ash, but lacks the swagger that our Ash has. Those qualities you just can't copy. After a bit of taunting, Good Ash has finally had enough and feeds Evil Ash the end of his shotgun. Ash eventually finds the Book of the Dead, But being fearful that he might get canceled, he refuses to say the correct N-words. And because he doesn't say it, the army of the dead is reanimated. Needless to say, Mr. Pitt is disappointed that Ash censored himself, for now the army of the dead is on its way. Being a professional killer of the undead, Ash rallies the remaining soldiers in the castle to fight the undead. Ash and Mr. Pitt work tirelessly to prepare Castle Kandar from attack. At this point in the movie, I swear Ash said something racist about Chinese jet pilots, but in the version I have, it's cut out. Using gunpowder technology, the first wave goes well for Castle Kandar, but eventually the overwhelming numbers of the undead breach the walls. Ash runs and gets his car, which has been totally ruined, in an attempt to make some sort of propeller-spinning, undead-killing machine. It drives around for just a little bit, then Ash intentionally crashes to avoid running into Sheila, who is still possessed. Ash and undead Sheila fight, and he deals a blow to feminism worldwide. Ash then fights Evil Ash, who now kind of looks like a bad guy from the Power Rangers. Evil Ash gets the Necronomicon and taunts Ash from the payload scoop of a catapult. Subtlety is not one of this film's strong suits. At that time, Henry the Redsman appeared and started turning the tide for the living while distracting Evil Ash. You'll never believe what happens next. Ash chops off Evil Ash's right hand, holding the Necronomicon, which... how does he have a hand? Anyway, Evil Ash is launched on a bag of gunpowder and is blown up. The remaining Deadites run away, and Sheila is somehow miraculously returned to normal for what it's worth. Mr. Pitt makes a potion to send Ash back to modern times. In the theatrical cut of The Army of Darkness, Ash is returned right back to the S-Mart, where he's telling a bored Ted Raimi about his adventures. No one believes his story, but just then a Deadite appears and Ash goes to work. In the original cut of the film, Ash is given the potion, but because he's been turned into a buffoon, takes too much of the potion and sleeps until it's the far future. In either case, Ash lives on to fight the undead, either in our time or the next. Ash Williams is a man deserving of our admiration. A ladies' man, a cunning warrior, an expert mechanic, a gifted scientist, and a defender of the living versus the undead. Thank you for watching. That was ridiculous.